Let's continue down our path of threat intelligence. And in this video is what we call our gathering. So I'm going to call this our gathering matrix. And I'm calling it a gathering matrix because in this video, we're going to talk about all the ways that we can collect and gather data for threat intelligence. So the first part is, well, where can we go to obtain additional information if we need to, right? Well, the first part I would say is what we call open source intelligence. Now, in a previous video, I showed you a platform called Spiderfoot. Spiderfoot can automate part of that process. I found that to be a really amazing tool. Being on engagements, it can support you across investigation, like defining basically gathering and consolidating data, right, from organizations once you're doing profiling and defining certain attributes and outcomes based on that engagement. You can then tie in those API feeds, as we mentioned before. So we set up service accounts, you can log in, and then a lot of them, obviously, some of them are free, some of them are paid, and then you can subscribe based on how many call outs you have based on those services. So service may have a certain amount of credits that you can utilize. Obviously, the more credits that you use, the more you may have to obviously bill, and obviously from a financial side of things. So um, from our gathering matrix, let's just sort of start off with open source intelligence. And the first part about OSINT, as you could imagine, is quite deep and wide because OSINT is basically collecting data that's publicly available, right, as we all know. And open source intelligence allows us to profile and fingerprint things that are publicly available, from domain recon to Google Dorking to getting ASN numbers from organizations and defining that subnets and their sub ranges and things like that. So you can start profiling a range of different infrastructure, a range of different, from social to their, web infrastructure of what protocols and what technologies they're potentially using. And a resource that's helped me a lot has been this OSINT framework. So if you can head over to osintframework.com, a very amazing tool that's been around for many years, and it can help you sort of dive down and dive into certain areas of open source intelligence. And this is, you can start looking at IP address information. You can even do investigations on files and videos and images and documents and social and, dating profiles and, potential public records as well. And you can start to see that this is a very deep and wide, framework, but it's very comprehensive, but also it's very valuable, right? So we can take that and then obviously tie into with other things such as, if we're doing domain recon or just general public information gathering tools like AMAS. Spiderfoot was a very good tool that we can consolidate a lot of the findings. We can do WHOIS and registry information and Google Dorking, and there's tools to also help us with our Google Docs. So I'm just going to jot some down here just to help make things a little bit easier. So we've got Google Dorking. We have AMAS, which is a great tool to profile the external perimeter of an organization. You've got the OSINT framework, which I've just showed you. We've got domain recon. If we're doing some sort of, maybe phishing, or if we're doing any other sort of domain attacks, subdomain takeovers, things like that. With Google Dorking, again, Dorking is I think one of the most amazing ways to quickly profile organizations. You can do a bunch of if-then parameters, like you can do a site. We can do a demo on this a little bit later, but for the simplicity of this video, Google Dorking just allows us to quickly profile a certain website with parameters of, are there code share sites that are available with this certain domain? Are there maybe a project management site associated? Is there a Pastebin-like site available? Are there database files? Are there backup files? Are there Git folders? You can quickly profile that. And obviously there's some tools. There's a great tool that I've used in the past called Dorks Hunter, which is, you can just, GitHub, you can look up this file called Dork Hunter or Dorks Hunter, and then you can basically tie in the APIs to it, and then you can just quickly do a domain search, and then it just blitzes past and does all the hard, you don't have to specify individual parameters inside Google Docs. You can use Docs Hunter to do that for you automatically. So, open source Intel is pretty much one of the first entry points into threat intelligence or gathering of data, which we're basically profiling for more additional information, whether it's staff names, whether it's, potential passwords. If we're looking at breached accounts, things like dhash. These are very common, online, password, historical password website. You can use PawnDB, which has been around for a long time. Let me just clean that up a little bit. Pawn database. That's Python built. So you can Google, you can, GitHub that as well. These are all credential leakages when you're doing, penetration testing, or when you're doing, again, threat intelligence, or if you're doing external recon, you want to start profiling if you're doing credential stuffing. These are all going through our TTPs as well. So if we remember in a previous video when we looked at our MITRE framework, and we're going to touch on that again a little bit more deeper in the next couple of videos, but once we start doing, credential stuffing attacks and credential spraying, you can start to see that there are also going to be tactics and procedures based on TTPs that we find online. So how are we going to circumvent and countermeasure those kinds of attacks? So that's the first part. So we've gone over the sort of the basics of OSINT, collecting open source intelligence, open source Intel data, and then consolidating that data based on our organization. The other one here is our feeds. Now, there are feeds available to us that we can, log in and have access for free. There's obviously paid services and paid fees. A couple of these, I'll just make this a little bit prettier as well, so we can make this sort of like a nice pretty graph. The threat intel feeds are available from vendors, in Australia, that we've got, the Signals Doctorate, and we've got, ASIO, which provides our services of intelligence. And then we've got the ACSC as well, the Australian Cybersecurity Centre. Also, these are all amazing providers who provide, if we look at all these, and I've got a tab here in just a moment, but also CyberCX, we've got the ASD, the Signals Doctorate. We've also got the ACSC, the Australian Cybersecurity Centre. These are all providers who you obviously can log in, you can go to the websites, and you can participate, and they can send you free feeds and updates in terms of providing you with regular threat advice or threat updates around, your specific industry. What are they seeing from a threat perspective? We've also then got vendors as well, right? Like I can mention some here as well that we're going to take a look at the moment, which is, Cisco Talos, which is one. There's Checkpoint. There's Mandiant. All these are threat profile feeds that we can, obviously some of these are paid, commercial, aggressive services that we can then tab into to give us more threat intel, threat advice based on our current industry and threat profile. So over here, we've got our ACSC. So you can go onto the website, you can have a look around. They can provide information. They do threat reports. They can give you the updates around some vulnerabilities that they're seeing here, like the ADC. That's been a recent one. They can provide you along with all that information based on, what they're seeing in the industry. If they're seeing a certain APT group or, targeting a specific organization, they can provide you that heads up. So that's our ACSC. We've also got here the Signals Doctorate. So that's the Australian government here in Australia. That's all sort of other services that you can tie into. And then we've got things like OSCERT. These are obviously security bulletins that we can also subscribe to. They can send you out information based on the industry, email subscriptions, things like that. So a couple more. Checkpoint is another one. We've also got Mandiant's threat intelligence. So these are all sort of threat intelligence providers, some great, organizations out there that are doing some amazing things to help us and give us feedback into the, the threat intelligence community. CyberCX, again, do some great threat intelligence, IBM, Cisco Talos, and the list goes on. So yeah, that's pretty much it from feeds. Let's quickly cover the other piece of area. So the other one here, I'm going to jot down just down the bottom here. So I'll cover this in the yellow. If you just take a moment, let me just color that in nice and quickly. The other area here is that we've got is also dark web. Now, I'm not going to talk too much about the dark web side of things just in this video because it can get quite, into a great field area that I don't really want to talk about right now. But the dark web monitoring allows for us to monitor, again, from brand reputational damages, right? So there are things that we can potentially find online, such as paste bin sites, forums, there's online communities, and then there's marketplaces. Right. And in most times, as well as when you're doing Google Talking, you can obviously find information from organizations in a spot where it shouldn't be, right? So sometimes this could also be considered as sort of insider threat if it is maybe, a insider who mistakenly sent something or, shared something online where they shouldn't have and ended up somewhere. We've seen cases where we found, a bunch of stuff on marketplaces from organizations, like there was a bunch of, sensitive information that we found online. And this is by doing dark web investigations, dark web, scanning and, profiling across the different ranges of marketplaces, paste bins, things like that to scour, certain identification methods of maybe there's an Excel file through a current, organizational unit that's using that. We can profile that against the domain name or the email of people or a very specific tagline that we can then reference that based on that organization. So there's vendors as well that participate and do dark web investigations, dark web monitoring. I'm not going to cover them in this video. It's just a concept for you to know that dark web is a form of data gathering as well. And finally, as we move on to the lucky last, if you've probably guessed the most technical part, so we've looked at feeds, we've looked at OSINT, we've looked at dark web. The last one here is human. And usually what we call it is human intelligence or humans. And that's basically our social. Right. So social engineering is usually the forefront around the human intelligence side. And that's because people possess a lot of data, right? Receptionists, EAs, people who have that business understanding, but also possess a lot of information across the business. Social engineering or social profiling of these people can help us create that backstory or create that false identification to then, socially engineer or ultimately deceive these people to hand over that sensitive information. So all sorts of cases, and this all sort of goes hand in hand, right? Because if you do enough recon and you've done enough OSINT and maybe you've investigated across the dark web, then it makes this part a lot easier and vice versa. So we can take all these feeds and gather this data through amazing community feeds, through doing open source intelligence, all the way to doing dark web investigations and then your human intelligence. And this is the forefront of how we gather data across threat intelligence. I hope you found this video useful. And again, I'll see you in the next video.